Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker. In the second video today, we're going to be talking about the new Paul George extension. And this might seem like a small bit of information, but it actually tells us a lot about what's going to happen with the Clippers moving forward. It's obviously a very good thing for the Clippers, no matter what your opinion of Paul George is. I think this is a good thing, certainly for them, and we're going to talk about what exactly this means for them, not only this coming season, but also in the future, and how this all relates to Kawhi Leonard as well. But with all those things said, really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload twice a day, every day, all throughout the NBA offseason, so it's a great place for consistent NBA content. You can also leave a like rating on the video as well. Helps me out a ton, lets me know that you're enjoying the content, and helps get the videos out to more people on YouTube as well. And you can hang out with me outside of these videos at the various socials at the bottom of the screen, as well as in a link tree in the description below. With those things said, let's talk about the Paul George extension. So he signed a new extension to his deal that now puts him with the Clippers for the next couple of years with a player option opt-out in the summer of 2024. And this is obviously a big deal because it takes away half of the potential disaster scenario here for the Clippers, because there was a possibility before he signed this extension that the Clippers would have given up, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and all the other pieces that they gave up in that Paul George trade in exchange for George, and then the opportunity to sign Kawhi Leonard there. And then both of those guys had the option to leave in the summer of 2021. They both have opt-outs. Kawhi still has that option, but re-signing Paul George to a new deal, keeping him with the Clippers through at least 2024, ideally, assuming he doesn't ask for a trade before then, is a huge deal. You can talk about, your negative opinions of Paul George all you want in terms of his postseason performance. You can even talk about how this might not be a good deal by the time we get to 2024 because of his age and things like that. But still, it's a good deal for the Clippers considering the amount of assets that they gave up for Paul George. Retaining that asset is a huge deal to them. If Kawhi and Paul George had both left, they would have been probably would have been in the worst position that any team has ever been in league history, considering the fact they would have no access to first round picks. They would not have any young talent on the roster, and they're the Clippers, and things, just don't go well for them in general. So that would have been a disaster scenario. They haven't completely avoided that yet, but having George on this longer term contract significantly decreases the risk that they're going to be really bad over the next 10 years, which was what was going to happen if both Paul George and Kawhi ended up leaving. Now, for the Thunder, this is a bit of a blow to the assets that are those Clippers future picks. It's still nice to have access to those future picks and pick swaps, but obviously having the opportunity for Kawhi and Paul George to both leave if things went really poorly with the Clippers this season increase the value of those picks. It's unlikely that they're going to be super high draft picks moving forward, assuming that George remains healthy while he is on this new deal. So a minor note there about the Thunder. But for this season specifically, this doesn't really change anything. The Clippers are still one of the more talented teams in the Western Conference. Yes, I got burned by saying that they were going to win the title last year. They had a postseason collapse. We all know the bad things about the Clippers at this point, right? But they still have Paul George. They still have Kawhi Leonard. They still have another move to possibly make here with the Lou Williams and the Patrick Beverley contracts and the Lou Williams expiring, where they can kind of cobble together another move here, whether that's during the season or before the season starts. That's still a possibility for them. And when you've got Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, again, you can have your opinions about them and about this team from last postseason, but it is still a talented group and it's still a team that needs to be taken seriously at the top of the Western Conference. And that isn't changed by this contract extension. Now, the interesting part to me is that there's two scenarios here moving forward for the Clippers. One, Kawhi stays in 2021 and they're a threat at the top of the West for as long as those guys are healthy and all NBA caliber players. Still having, two of the top 15, two of the top 20 players in the entire league puts them in contention to make the conference finals every single year. And if Kawhi stays in 2021, that's going to continue to be the case for as long as those two guys are there. They've got Kawhi, they've got Paul George, they've got Marcus Morris. Presumably they re-sign Luke Kennard, and they go forward from there. Now, the other option here is that things go really poorly this season in LA, and Kawhi does end up deciding to leave in the summer of 2021 to the Lakers or to the Heat or wherever, right? And in that scenario, things aren't as scary now for the Clippers. Obviously, it sucks that Kawhi left after just 2 full seasons in LA, but having Paul George signed longer term now means that at least the team won't be awful. And a team that consists of Marcus Morris, Paul George, Luke Kennard, some other pieces on the roster, and some cap flexibility in the summer of 2022 is not a bad situation to be in. It's still the Clippers, and there's still kind of a cloud hanging over this franchise as a result of Kawhi leaving and the collapses that they've had. And if Kawhi did leave, I would presume that would mean because this season didn't go well at all. That would still obviously be an issue that this franchise has had to struggle with for a very long time. But specifically on the basketball court, as it relates to their team, they shouldn't be too bad, which is a huge positive for them and something that I think should give Clippers fans, if there's any out there, a bit of comfort knowing that there is some security here moving forward, and removes the scariest possible scenario here, which was that both of these guys could have possibly left in the summer of 2021. Now, for George specifically, I do think that there's an argument to be made, given some of the health issues that he's had in the past, given some of the performance issues that he's had in the past in the postseason otherwise, that signing him to this kind of contract isn't a good idea in a vacuum. And in a couple years, we'll be looking at this thinking, man, this is a bad contract. Paul George isn't worth this. He's not an all-NBA caliber guy anymore. He's hurt all the time. Kawhi isn't here. He can't carry the team. I think that's a conversation worth having in a vacuum. However, specific to the Clippers scenario, it's a no-brainer. You can't negotiate with Paul George in this scenario. You can't say, I know that you could possibly leave in 2021 and you and Kawhi could leave us out to dry and then we're completely screwed for the next 10 years, but what do you think about maybe making like 33 a year rather than 39? You know what I mean? Like, there's no leverage. There's no position for the Clippers to be able to strike a bargain and to negotiate with Paul George. That scenario just doesn't exist. Like, you have to sign Paul George to this contract if he wants it, and that's what they ended up doing, and that is the smart move. Now, you can argue the idea of putting themselves in this situation in the first place and being held hostage, for lack of a better term, by Kawhi and Paul George to this point, because of all the assets they gave up to get George to then get Kawhi. But still, it's a situation they put themselves in, and that's just kind of where they're at now with the Paul George thing. One last part that's interesting about this, though, is that with the extension and with things that George continues to say publicly about, I owe them a title or blah, 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 people are continuing to be really, really negative about the Clippers, and deservedly so. They had an awful finish to the year last year. I know that the bubble was a weird situation, but they should have been better in the postseason. They should have at least made the conference finals. They were a very talented team, albeit a flawed one at certain points. But I think that maybe we're getting to the point where we're starting to underestimate how good this Clippers team could be this upcoming season. They've got other guys like Zubac. They've got other guys like Serge Ibaka. Again, the Lou Williams, Patrick Beverley thing is still in play. And as long as Kawhi and PG are healthy, I still think that is a real legitimate threat. And I know how good that the Lakers are and that they got better this offseason. The Nuggets are still going to be there. But if it comes down to just one series, conference final series between the Lakers and Clippers, I don't see why they wouldn't be able to make the finals. This is not me making a prediction. This is not me getting suckered into thinking that they're way better than they are, like I did last year, because I just didn't recognize the flaws that they had with their finishing lineup, or I recognized the flaws or just didn't realize how big of a deal it was going to be. But still keep an eye out on this Clippers team and understand that this is a huge, huge positive for them. Even if you think it could be a bad deal long term, having the security of having Paul George under contract makes everything a lot less dramatic. Yes, it weakens the strength of the 2021 free agency class, which is a different video that I'm going to be making here within the next couple of days, which makes things slightly less interesting in the summer 2021, and we still don't know exactly what's going to happen with Kawhi. But still, when you're signing someone like Paul George to a contract this big, when you're in the situation that the Clippers are in, you have to do it every single time, and I think they absolutely made the correct move. So with all this being said, that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.